Dear students, dear competition judges,
ladies and gentlemen in the audience, online, welcome.
I am Cecilia.
And I'm Zoe.
And we're both futurEU co-founders, alumni of the Hertie School, and we're both working at the European Commission in Brussels now.
And we're very happy to be here today, to welcome you in person and online. Hi, Mom. And we're very thankful for the Hertie School to host us today.
But first and foremost, a big congratulations to all of the semi-finalists who made it here today to present their policy proposals. So, congrats.
And without further ado, we officially declare the final of the student competition open. Europe is going through very difficult times. When Russia invaded Ukraine, war returned to Europe since the Balkans Wars. Undeniably, this affects the continent in very different ways.
Indeed, we are facing, and we're going to face, severe social and economic challenges that, especially after 2 years of a pandemic, are threatening to make the condition of young people even more isolated and even more alienated from the EU.
This is 2022. 2022 is the year of the youth. Young Europeans are the future, and that's a fact. We need to make sure that they are included in European policymaking. We need to make sure that we have a better, greener, more inclusive and united EU. This is why we have devoted this second edition to the youth. And this year, 34 teams from all over Europe submitted a policy brief on power to the future, visionary policies for young Europeans.
In fact, we have asked students to come up with bold, visionary policy proposals about what the EU should do and what action the EU should take targeted at young European now and future generations, and then argue why their proposals would make the EU more responsive, more appealing to their needs, and why we need them, in other words.
But first, we are honored to welcome Damian Boeselager. Damian, you are a member of the European Parliament, a co-founder of Volt, which is a pan-European political movement, and also you're a Hertie alumnus, as ourselves. And you are the keynote speaker for this final, so thank you very much for this. Warm welcome to you, Damian, and I can invite you to the floor. You have the floor, Damian. Thank you very much.
For organizing this absolutely amazing event, and thanks a lot for inviting me to it. I have to apologize because my voice is almost gone, and I'm also a bit, let's say, here with my last energy because I just came back from a trip from the US and then went to the plenary, so excuse me if my thoughts are not completely stringent, but I'll try my best to make my most important points. The first one is the question of why do we get active? And I think it's an important question, especially if I look at the projects that you have been proposing and for which you have been traveling here. And the question is fundamental to my own journey into politics and into, let's say, societal change, if you want. And for me, it really came with a sense of urgency. It came with a sense of urgency when, like in 2016, you had Trump getting elected, you had all these populist right-wing movements starting. And I somehow felt it doesn't really make sense that, you know, the problems that we have to deal with become bigger, they become cross-country problems, whereas these movements really want to go back to the nation state and say, like, look, we close our borders, we don't want migration, we don't want anyone to tell us from the European evil Brussels bubble how to handle stuff. We want to go back to the smaller level, if you want. And I mean, in itself, I would say that like a national solution is not bad. You know, nations can solve problems and even regions can solve problems and even the local level can solve problems. But if you look at the actual effects of not solving the biggest topics of our time, we can see that there is a huge problem if we have a lack of European cooperation. And one personal experience that I had been working in before is the field of migration and asylum, where you still see that because we don't have a European system, there are actually people who are severely suffering because of that. And now we can like fast forward, you know, since back at that time, 2016 to today, And you can see that this has become even more true. And you have mentioned it just a bit, yeah, like the whole question of the pandemic, where it was absolutely certain that if we don't cooperate in a good way, we would actually have nations tilt against each other, bidding for vaccines, for example, or you would have, I don't know, no cross-border help with hospital beds, as it was, for example, in Strasbourg and in Freiburg, just across the border, and also actually some people from Italy being flown into Germany and other countries. So the pandemic is definitely just another very obvious example of a cross-border challenge. I mean, per definition. Climate change, also very simple. We'll never stop at the borders. And then you can go on, and obviously you will get to the question of Ukraine. And I think this, for me at least, and probably for many of you, has been a complete game changer in my mind, in just how I look at the world and how I even see Europe. And I remember that when we started with the whole idea of like, hey, let's integrate Europe further, let's unite, people often came to me and said like, yeah, Damian, but just don't use the peace argument. Peace, that's really something for the Second World War, and like doesn't really matter anymore. Don't think about it too much. We have to find a new narrative. And I don't think this is so true anymore. And this feeling that I had in 2016 of still being at the crossroads of either going into the nationalist direction, back to the nation state, or going into the more European direction and somehow, a functioning European democracy, is still there and extremely strong, especially also again after the elections in Hungary just last weekend, and with the polls that we can see in France for the coming weekend. So I think this battle for in which direction Europe is going is still very ongoing. And it's really important for me to get out of the spectator role and sitting on your sofa and think, oh, this is happening. Oh, that doesn't look so good with the Hungarian polls. But to go into the active role, into the I want to change something, and also understanding that you have power to change stuff. I mean, if I have learned one thing from the last years, it is that, from being in your student room to think, okay, let's maybe build a European party, to actually, potentially achieving something, it's not such a fast step. I'm the same person than I was back then, just with more hair and more sleep maybe. But like, it's really not such a, such a big change in myself. It was just a small decision of potentially getting active. And for me, this is really like a fundamental learning that I had to understand, is that we individually have power over where things are going. We're not passive participants in like this global game of politics that we read about in the news, or of our societies, but we actually have individual power to change stuff. And so I'm extremely happy that you sit here now today with your ideas of what you want to change, and how especially you also want the European Union to be better, and how to make it more approachable, and how to help that the effects of potential inflation and increases and social effects and so on, that this is all brought together and tackled. That I think there was also an idea of bringing young people more into politics. So these are all amazing ideas, and I think you have already all won by being here, by actually bringing your ideas forward and making sure that we are active in shaping our societies and not just passive participants in something that's called democracy. So thanks a lot. I'm very excited to see at least the beginning, but then I sadly have to leave. But I'm very honored that I could quickly speak to you, and I hope you have a fantastic evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Damian. That was short but intense for sure. And by the way, if you haven't heard it yet, Damian was also the guest of one of our episodes. I mean, we have a podcast called The Visionary, and he was there to discuss with us and giving even more source of inspiration about what the youth can do to change the things in Europe. And in particular, he was compelling youth to join politics and change Europe from within the institutions, which is another idea that you might also, confront and discuss. But let's start now to get practical. And before we start, let me remind you a little bit of how this is going to work. Each team is going to have 12 minutes to present their proposal. If you remember, this morning you had 10 minutes, now you're going to have a little more, 12 minutes. Then you're going to have up until 10 minutes to reply to questions, 2 from the judges and up to 4 from the audience. Remember to keep the time, the time is going to run. So have a look at the timekeeper. The timekeeper is going to be there with a yellow card and a red card to just remind you of how much time you're going to have. Also, for the online audience, you can ask questions by using Menti. And there's going to be a code that you can use in order to just plug in your questions. We are going to make sure to read them. Okay, so this is going to be how it's going to be for the presentation of the teams, after which the judges are going to have 20 minutes to decide, to deliberate over the winners. We're going to welcome them back, and then we're going to have the winners of the second edition of the futurEU competition 2022. Okay, now we're ready. So please let me welcome the team 84. So team 84 is, please come to the stage. Yes. And team 84 is coming from Sciences Po, Bocconi and Hertie. And they are Francesca, Giacomo and Nicola. So come, the floor is yours and good luck.
Members of the jury, distinguished guests, fellow colleagues and futurEU staff, thank you very much for this opportunity. Me, Francesca and Nicola are honored to be here and to be able to present our policy proposal regarding increasing youth opportunities for in remote areas of the European Union here at the futurEU finals. So we decided to address this issue because it is a major issue for youth Europeans and for the future of the European Union. We know that 12.2% of youths living in these areas are early leavers from training and education. And we know that their priorities lie in more quality jobs, better youth work opportunities, and more efficient transportation systems and other life and social benefits. So once we saw this data, we wondered if there was actually a further detachment from the EU in these areas. And we found out by looking at the Eurobarometer that 50% of youth respondents answered that they felt not very or not at all attached to the EU. So it becomes also a matter of making everybody feel EU citizens all across Europe. And this is a well-known issue. Policies have been brought forward to try and tackle the disparities between regions across Europe. However, we found two major backlashes in these policies. The first one is that European solutions have been blind to the rural youth binomial. This is true for policies and for funds. And this is the case for rural and cohesion policies, which do not properly tackle the new generations. And it's true also for youth policies, such as the YES package or the EU Youth Strategy, where they either do not focus enough on remote areas, or they do try and tackle and highlight targets to address these issues, this binomial, but then they fail to implement effective and significant solutions towards this issue. And a second policy issue we found was that the EU funding governance is overly complicated and produces then ineffective local implementation of the youth rural initiatives, mainly because funding projects are managed either directly, and this is the case, for example, for youth policies, or in a shared management way, which is more the case of cohesion policies. But if we want to address the youth-rural binomial case, these both have some drawbacks. They both create detachment from the EU for the youths, and this is in the case of direct management because it is a centralized approach which lacks of the localized effort which is essential in these areas. In the case of shared management, it relies a lot on the implementation of member states, then leading to possible conflicts between ministries involved in these areas, and then to the possible politicization of EU funding. Thus, when we were looking at possible policy options to address this issue, when we looked at the idea of developing new policies, but in the same shared management approach, this would have created the same drawbacks that I just mentioned in the previous slide. Well, if we look at using the same funds, but in direct management, so more in the cohesion policy approach, this would still have the drawback of not being enough local to address these the youths in the rural areas. And so we believe that the right solution should be an integrated approach, using the same funds that are already present in the European Union, but managing them differently, and in particular in a direct way with a profound local aspect of it to arrive directly to the youths in these areas. And now I leave the floor to Francesca.
Thank you, Giacomo. So the EU needs to go local, and to do so we propose to implement a network of local establishments named European Youth Rural Offices, or EROS, that will work on behalf of the Commission to directly implement and directly manage EU funds in remote areas for the rural youth. So formally, AROS will be part of the DG for Regional and Urban Policy of the European Commission. As you can see, it already has unit Regio 1, 2, and 3. So we propose to fund a new unit, Regio 04, which will be in charge of their coordination, monitoring, and evaluation. And through this unit, European Youth Rural Offices will also receive financing, primarily through the European Regional Development Fund, which focuses on the social and economic development of EU territories and on correcting the imbalances across these territories. But where will AROS be located? So according to us, an ideal solution would be to use the tool of the NUT classification, and in particular the NUTS 3 regions, which are the smaller type of classification, small regions which is used for a specific diagnosis. But not all of them, just the intermediate and predominantly rural remote regions, so those which are more distant from the big cities and therefore those who need this type of support the most. And from this picture, we just wanted to show you how these regions are not deserted areas. They do have a lively administration center where AROS will be working, but at the same time, they do have many remote territories that do need more support than other regions. So this is the map of the regions that I was telling you about. As you can see, they are many. So they don't have necessarily to be all 204. The geographical allocation could be depending on a series of criteria like population density, area extension, income per capita. So they may be even 50 less. The important thing is that AROS become effective in the local territory. And they will do so through two main pillars. The first pillar will be action to directly manage EU investments at the local level. So through their own dedicated ERDF budget, they will issue grants tailored to local areas as well as contracts to local stakeholders to help them implement specific policies for the rural youth. For example, if they identify an issue in the school-to-work transition in a specific context, they can fund synergies between the school and the job market, for example, through more training specifically for youth people. And the second pillar will be a role of consultancy and support towards local administrations to help them apply and win further funding, for example, the cohesion funds, in order to then implement them more effectively and transparently, for example, to improve the transportation system of the region, which will also be beneficial for young people. And finally, we have envisioned a third characteristic of AROS, which will be mobility. So local teams will be able to move around the territory in order to provide services on a case-by-case basis to the areas which are most difficult to reach in big areas. And that's the region.
Thank you, Franci. So now I'll go through our timeline. Starting from January 2023, a dedicated team will design in all its details the proposal and will provide an impact assessment and a cost-benefit analysis, which will be forwarded to national authorities to get some feedback and eventually smooth and shape the proposal accordingly. Starting from January 2025, we will do an HR assessment that I will deepen in the next slide, and the proposal will be ready to be included in the 2028-2034 multi-annual financial framework. That we expect would be approved in December 2027. This will give us 1 year and a half to train our personnel and to select it in June 2029. And in this year and a half, we will also set our physical offices by cooperating with national and local authorities. In January 2030, we will be finally ready to go. Okay, let me now deepen these 2 points of AROS personnel, which we believe are crucial. First of all, with the HR mapping, we will understand how many people would relocate from European institutions to local areas, under which conditions, so that we will understand how many local agents we should contract and also which incentives we should provide. EU officials will be selected based on their competencies and their knowledge of the language and the culture of the area they wish to relocate to. While contract agents will be also selected by their competencies and by their knowledge of European values to make sure that everyone is ready for the task they have to pursue. They will have 1 year and a half to train for these skills. And also we believe that this will bring benefits both to EU officials and both to contract agents. So, in light of this, will AROS be a cost or a benefit for the European Union? we strongly believe there will be a strong benefit. Of course, areas are a long-term proposal, so in the short term, it is likely that the most underdeveloped areas will face more costs than benefit, but this is what the proposal is there for, to allow these areas to catch up with more developed ones. Also, let's not forget that HR and budget allocation will be done through strict criteria, and that continuous monitoring and evaluation will be pursued for each area's its activities and its results. What challenges will we face in this process? First of all, political feasibility. This is a two-phased challenge. We will have the acceptance from member states, which also links back to the third point, because some member states will have few or no areas due to having few or no local remote areas. And also, we will face acceptance from local authorities, which may not like such a strong intervention of European institutions on their territory. Another challenge will be to implement a coherent policy throughout all the European Union and to effectively evaluate and monitor such a broad set of different activities. Though we thought about some ways to tackle these challenges, for example, of course, we will have to ensure that areas will follow European, national, and local laws as any other firm or organization. And also, we'll have to ensure a deep and constant dialogue with national and local authorities to be sure that no ideological clashes arise. Also, we will have to implement some guidelines and clear objectives for all areas to reach. By implementing our proposal, we will be able to provide a concrete response to rural youth needs by also giving them targeted resources, human and economic resources, and a targeted strategy. We will be able to get closer to European citizens with offices that, due to their flexible structures, will be ready to quickly adapt to changing needs and priorities of European citizens. Thank you very much for your attention, and a special mention goes to our colleague Margot Truc, which was too far to be here, but close enough to really be a pillar of this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now stay there. Judges, is your time for the questions.
Can you? So thank you very much. This was an intriguing presentation. I'm also fascinated by the idea of having these local offices that tackle specific youth needs. My fundamental question here is, what are these agencies actually going to do? Because it seems to me that you have a lot of cohesion money, we have a lot of regional funds at the EU level, and they provide a lot of the stuff that we were talking about, right? So trying to increase job growth in remote and poor areas, improving infrastructure, making sure that we have social funds as well that also help training people. So I wonder, what is it exactly, what would you expect these local offices to do differently from what is already there? And what is your idea of what youth-targeted policies should look like, other than what we've seen in the last 30 years?
Yeah, thank you very much. I also found the proposal very interesting and tackling, I think, a very important issue. But one of the questions, I mean, you mentioned in the beginning that the EU needs to go local. And what really struck me when I was listening to you as well, is that your idea is to put EU officials in the local areas. And I'm wondering here whether this is really the right approach, because you basically want to go local, so you need local expertise, and you might sort of mismatch if you come with a coherent EU criteria catalog, rather than actually having people on the ground knowing the situation.
Thank you.
Feel free to answer now to the questions of the judges, and then we'll take the questions from the audience.
Thank you for your questions. So first of all, let's start from the first question. Concretely, what will AROS be doing? The difference with previous approaches is that AROS will represent a more tailored approach to the local context. So while in the past EU policies have been managed by the Commission at a centralized level or either shared with the national authorities, but implementing policies which are more homogeneous because they have to cover different types of territories across the Union, this type of approach would allow to have localized answers to localized needs. So this means knowing the ground, as you were saying in your last question, knowing what happens, what are the real problematics of each different types of area, and therefore provide a tailored solution to that type of area. That's the difference with our proposed solution. If you want to add something.
Okay, about the second question, if you allow me to go back to our slide of, okay, yeah, basically, we think that one of the strong points of our proposal is to mix expertise of European officials and local agents. Of course, European officials can be empowered by the knowledge of the territory, and local agents can be empowered by the means of the European Union. For example, of course, there are local agents, but the problem is that they cannot work especially for their territory in European institutions. Our proposal will give them the opportunity to work for the EU in their own territory, and also will provide them with the new gateway for a career in European institutions. For EU officials, this proposal would spread reciprocal knowledge of different nationalities, and also to work in an area we think would be an invaluable experience also for a future career in central institutions, because you can see how things work on the field. So we think that this proposal would be very valuable both to EU officials and local agents, thanks to this mixing of expertise and different approaches.
Okay, so is there any question from the audience? Yes. Okay, Sebastian, keep your hands raised so that Tanguy can come to you with the mic.
Really interesting proposal. I was wondering, coming from a rural town myself, I've had my fair share of experience of programs which were designed by people who think they know what the youth wants, but don't actually know what the youth wants. And I was wondering, the classic remedy for this type of program is to include the public management concept of voice, so that you have people actually, so youth from the region actually talk to the EU officials and give them their opinions. Do you have any mechanism for that already established? I didn't see it, but if not, is there a reason why you don't think this should be the case? Sorry.
Is there already another question from the audience? Yes, keep your hands straight.
Yeah, I really like your policy because I also heard it this morning. But I wanted to ask you, like, we're seeing that there is a trend of people moving from rural areas to cities, and your policy will be implemented in like 10 years' time. So how will you ensure that in the time that the policy will be actually active, people like younger generation in rural areas would like already left rural areas? Like, there is also like, this is a, I would say, medium long-term policy. Do you also have like a short-term part to ensure that when the policy will actually be implemented, there will still be youth in the rural areas?
Shall we take also the online question already? No, perfect. Feel free to answer this one first.
Thank you very much for your questions. Very good point. It's absolutely important to include the voice of young people in the work of AROS, according to us. This is why we may have envisioned a couple of different mechanisms to do so. First of all, through the mobility teams, the agents or the EU bureaucrats will be able to move to the most remote areas and rural areas to ask people and collect relevant local data on how to implement certain projects. At the same time, we expect EROs to have constant dialogue with local administrations, which hopefully will also be we will also comprise young people in their effort to implement projects in local areas. But probably most notably, we thought, we didn't include it in the presentation, but EROs will also, in our idea, in our mind, give opportunity to young people to do internships there, and therefore in that way they will include also the voice and the inputs of young people in their proposals, because young people will be working in that environment and will be able to give their feedback.
Thank you. Okay, so regarding your second question instead, I mean, of course, this is a long-term proposal, and so its effects might be visible only from 2030 onwards. However, first of all, it's not maybe too realistic to assume that in 80 years' time the rural areas are completely without any youth people, but still the concept of repopulating these areas is very strong. So even if in the most underdeveloped areas, of course, as we said, there's going to be even more time to then make them catch up with the maybe more developed rural areas. But as we said also then before, the NUTS 3 regions aren't such remote rural areas per se. They're like, in Italy, they're the provinces, right? So there are provinces, and so there are a lot of people living in these areas, right? So at the same time, there's not really that depopulation probably effect to then be regarded. Still, if we were to say, to want to do something in this time lapse, of course, there are several EU policy options that are already in place. And so one could try and, in the meantime, if these issues are highlighted, try to solve these in the meanwhile, while you start implementing all the phase. I don't know if you want to add anything. Okay.
Wait, we still have some more minutes and some more questions. And Leah, can you please read out loud any question, if there is one, from the online audience?
There's a question on the first pillar of your suggestion, and kind of expanding a bit what these initiatives could really look like through examples, and showing how these would really bridge the gap between the EU and these rural areas. And I also go with the second question. There's another question of how to ensure actual engagement on the ground. So, for example, this goes back to, I think, the HR questions that we've kind of discussed. If there's not the interest to engage, and how to create that engagement in a positive manner. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, about the examples for first pillar activities. Francesca already talked about the transition between school to work, for example, or I mean, the strength of the proposal is that it is very local. So the ERO can really evaluate what are the specific problem for their area. For example, another example could be there is not enough workers for a particular firm or firm district. For example, mechanic industries need worker. They do not find it in their local areas. And so the ERO could implement a program to train young people to be ready to respond to this work opportunity when they grow up. Another problem that a remote area could face, young people have no opportunities to make activities other than schools, for example, sports or cultural activities. The EROs could see that and could promote sport teams, could promote music festival, art festivals. Do you guys have other examples? I think that these could be good examples. Second question?
And I might just go back to the slide on HR mapping here. So with regards to the engagement question, well, first of all, with regards to EU officials, many EU officials might actually want to go and work in these areas because it is from their home country or close to their hometown, truly, and so might want to relocate there. And of course, it is also a matter of the European Union, then with the European Commission, to make this these areas attractive to these EU officials. And at the same time, though, local contractors, I don't believe there would be much of an engagement issue in the sense that you're giving the local people the opportunity to work for an EU institution, so the European Union, and thus also to probably have an intensive training moment, so to acquire new capabilities, and then to work, as I said, for a new institution, for an international institution. So in that sense, I wouldn't see much of it. And in that case, then, if member states agree to implement these policies, it would be also up to them to make this opportunity attractive to everyone.
No, thank you very much. You may return to your seat. Thank you very much. Now let's turn to our second final team. Ladies, welcome. Please welcome a mixed team 54, Benedetta, Allegra, Carolina, and Federica. The floor is yours.
Welcome everyone to our presentation. This afternoon we will illustrate how the introduction of youth quotas in the European Parliament may be an effective measure to tackle the underrepresentation of young Europeans in a policy-making process. The lack of youth representation is one of the most pressing challenges in today's political scenario. In fact, the current demographic change is not only inflicting a greater social security burden on younger generations, but it is further aggravating the already existing gap between youth participation and representation in European policymaking. On one hand, in response to a rapidly aging population, governments raise the retirement age in order to maintain a balanced worker-to-retiree ratio and respond to a growing demand for a generous pension system, thus leaving higher taxes and contributions to young employees. But on the other hand, as the number of elderly increases, their preferences gain even greater political weight as the age of the median voter rises as well. And in turn, the interests of the young risk being marginalized and sidelined by policymakers.
Now, this would not necessarily be a huge concern if such interests overlap with those of the elderly. However, evidence shows that young Europeans have distinct political inclinations with a greater concern for climate-related issues, for example, but not only. Younger cohorts are also less conservative on social issues and more aware of post-materialist ones, such as mental health and LGBTQ+ based discrimination. So there is also evidence that younger people are much more likely to see the benefits of a diverse society. For example, in France, 83% of young people see diversity as desirable, compared to just 53% among the 60+ cohort. Younger generations are also more likely to see racial discrimination as an issue to be addressed. For instance, around 2/3 of young Italians consider racial discrimination as an extremely serious problem, while just 31% of the elderly do. So this age difference is quite striking. Regarding the economic sphere instead, young Europeans are also more open to globalization. In short, all this evidence shows that there is a cleavage between young and old Europeans in terms of preferences, and which makes it necessary to introduce youth quotas.
But are parties taking these different preferences into account, perhaps? Arguably, they have started to, and we have seen this with the extraordinary rise of the Green Party in recent years. And this further shows that it should also be in politicians' interest to take into account the preferences of young Europeans. We have also seen with the latest election for the European Parliament that an increased participation of younger generations leads to higher turnout and support of pro-European parties. Yet, this increased emphasis on climate change is a long time coming, and there are still a lot of issues that didn't make it into the agendas of policymakers, or they have not been addressed adequately. Instead, having more young people in the European Parliament would lead to a substantial and faster shift in policy priorities, as young and old Europeans have different perceptions of the urgency of these matters. But you may wonder, when should we stop them? Should we also introduce LGBTQ plus quotas or other minority quotas? The answer is that youth quotas already take these minorities under their umbrella, as the composition of the youngest cohort has become much more diverse in time. And younger generations nowadays embody multiple intersectional identities. Therefore, by implementing youth quotas, we are automatically taking the interests of other minorities into account. However, we have focused on youth quotas because the process of demographic change is further exacerbating the lack of youth representation. If we don't take action now, these current systematic disadvantages will become even greater and more serious in the future. And this is precisely why youth quotas are important right now. The lack of youth representation within European institutions is not a novel issue. In the 2014 election, only 11.4% of MEPs were under 35. And although some improvements have been made with the 2019 election, this has not been enough. In fact, at the last election, the average age of MEPs was still 50 years old. So it is time that the EU starts prioritizing young Europeans with a series of concrete policy actions, specifically aimed at counteracting the lack of youth representation.
And speaking of practical actions, our solution to effectively address these issues is the adoption of youth quotas in the European Parliament, enlarging the share of young MEPs. Young politicians find it difficult to run for parliamentary seats because they face big entry barriers, both structural and cultural, that prevent them from having an active role in politics. In some cases, national electoral laws disadvantage youth participation, imposing high age requirement to vote and to run for office. Consider, for instance, Italy or Greece, where the age to run for parliamentary seats is 25, the highest in Europe. Secondly, consider how costly it is to campaign to run for office. And now imagine how hard it would be for a young politician to gather that kind of funding. As for social barriers, we know that politics is historically the domain of older people, and that the mentality of party elites often goes in this direction, implying paternalistic views towards younger generations of politicians. Lowering the barriers will have to be a goal of our proposal, and we'd advise to strengthen parties' youth wings and making the electoral law more welcoming for young candidates. Our timing is actually pretty good, as currently there's an electoral law reform being discussed, which entails symbolically setting the voting age at 16 and the age to stand as a candidate at 18. Okay, so given that the share of under 35 European adults was approximately 18% in 2022, we would advise for under 35 MEPs to represent approximately 20% of the European Parliament. And even though this does not guarantee that youth concerns will automatically gain the political weight that they deserve, it surely improves the odds. It would in fact imply fairer intergenerational outcomes and more political equity, with higher chances of an active advocacy on behalf of the young. Also keep in mind that the presence of young MEPs constitutes a crucial symbolic gesture. Let's now see how the measure could be put into place practically. Quotas can be applied through a number of modalities, and we'll be focusing on 3 of those. First, we have reserved seats that fix the number of young MEPs to be elected within the parliament. Now, such a measure would imply a very high probability of success, but at the same time, it would raise legitimacy concerns, as young candidates would not undergo the same political competition, electoral competition, as everyone else. Secondly, we have voluntary party quotas that are internal targets set by political parties in order to include a certain percentage of young candidates. This, however, would not be required by law, and it would imply a very slow change, which risks undermining the salience of the issue, as most parties would not feel bound by the requirement. Third, and lastly, we have legislated candidate quotas that mandate that a minimum number of candidates are of the underrepresented group. It is a binding form of candidate quota for all parties that intend to compete for parliamentary seats. Moreover, if this was not enough to guarantee compliance, this modality includes sanctions in case of nonconformity, and it also remains adjustable to different electoral systems, which makes it very flexible, but which also increases implementation difficulties.
So we believe that within the European context, the most feasible alternative is represented by the legislated youth candidate regime. This would fit in Article 2022 and 223 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. To then enforce the policy recommendation, it is important to consider two aspects. Firstly, given that our proposal quota regime is binding, sanctions represent an essential element to be taken into account, and they should be accounted for based on the degree of non-compliance by a party. Secondly, for the rank and order rule, which defines how candidates are posed in the electoral list, two features should be taken also into account: the requirement to use proportional representation, as well as the presence of specific national provisions. While PR is mandated by EU law, there are also specific national provisions that define the specific electoral system. And our proposal can be adjusted to that. In preferential voting systems, the rule could establish that among the first 4 choices, at least one must be for an under 35 candidate. In single transferable voting system, then, the rule could establish that within the first 4 positions, there would need to be at least one under 35 candidate. And in closed list arrangements, then, each party would have to place at least a candidate that is under 35 within the first 4 choices. As for the adoption of our policy recommendation within European institutions, it is important to mention that the Parliament holds it's the only issue where the Parliament has the right of initiative. Therefore, as we know that it is too late now for our policy recommendation to be implemented in the 2024 elections, we would aim for its introduction in the 2029 elections. So the relevance of after letting people understand and policymakers understand the relevance of our policy proposal, we would need to lobby for its introduction and put it at the top of MEPs' agendas. It would then be a time for the Parliament to initiate an electoral law reform, and including youth quotas. The reform will firstly need to be discussed in the European Parliament on Constitutional Affairs, and then the Parliament would the Parliament plenary would vote on it. In case of a successful result, then the Council of Ministers would step in and negotiate the resulting treaty.
So having seen how we would enforce and implement our proposal, it's now time to evaluate its impact. So first of all, a criticism that is often put forward is that quotas represent a limitation to the voters' freedom of choice in elections and that they might impair meritocracy. However, our proposal does not prevent meritocratic selections, since candidates are still subject to fierce competition to win a seat in parliament. Also, since youth quotas alone might not be too effective, we think that they should be enforced together with complementary measures to enhance youth participation. Specifically, we believe that the youth wings of political parties should be strengthened, because if so, they could successfully pressure political parties to select certain young candidates to electable positions. Moreover, given that the process of implementation can involve complex political negotiations that might make it harder to reach a compromise, youth wings might be also crucial in convincing political parties to agree on such a mandated policy by pressuring MEPs and making them more open to dialogue. Indeed, introducing them could represent a temporary and relatively costless way to promote cultural change by encouraging a trickle-down effect and neutralizing the paternalistic view that young people are not capable of engaging in political matters. This would firstly lead to more young voices in the parliament, and then to more young people in politics through their symbolic representation. Just by seeing that they're being represented in the European Parliament, this might make them feel more trusting towards the EU, facilitating communication and collaboration. So concluding, in light of their institutional ripple effect, this would lead to a more age-diverse parliament, better able to represent the various concerns of EU constituents. So we have voted in 2019, now it's up to European institutions to act. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Team 54. The judges, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me already? Yeah.
Try.
Okay. Thanks to all four of you for this lively presentation and also for the very thoughtful paper. I fully agree with you. It's a disaster that most people currently in power will be dead at the time the world will enter the full chaos caused by man-made climate change. So therefore, I'm very much in favor of empowering the youth, and I support your proposal that among MEPs we need a youth quota. However, do you also have a solution for the problem that the important posts within the parliament, so be it committee chairs, committee coordinators, group leaders, rapporteurs for important files, that they are mostly held by old, often white men, and the same is true for the political groups. MEPs normally vote with their political group, and again there the decisions are often taken by old, again white men. Put it differently, ensuring a minimum of young MEPs, I would say, is a necessary condition, but to empower the youth, it might perhaps not be sufficient. What would you say?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I also have a lot of sympathy for this idea, and I like your discussion, also the discussion of entry barriers. I think it's very good. I think I have a question about about your policy alternatives. So you are opposed to reserved seats, saying that if we would introduce reserved seats, young people would not have to undergo the same competitive process when compared to other groups. But isn't this the idea behind quotas as well, that in a way we reduce some of the competition? I'm not saying that this is a problem, but if we're going to reduce competition anyways, why then not go for reserved seats rather than the quotas that you suggest?
Thank you very much for your questions. I'll be addressing the second one that you posed. We are, let's say, against, we wouldn't advise for the implementation of reserved seats because, as we say, we fear that they would mess with the competition that is created with elections. Competition would be let's say altered in the same way with quotas alone, and that's of course true. But quotas do not. We believe that with quotas, the people that deserve to be represented will be represented. With reserved seats, the problem would be that the risk would be of a representation of people that do not deserve to be there. So, for instance, if a party doesn't have a strong youth wing, then probably it doesn't. A young person belonging to that party probably doesn't deserve to represent that party, and it probably wouldn't even represent the interests of the voters of that party. So that is basically our point. Sorry.
I can also add something on this. So we believe that for sure, reserved seats would lead to 100% succession of our policy recommendation, because you reserve the seat for young people to be elected there. But it's a matter also of degrees and political consensus in a way, because for sure, in a way, it would be harder for reserved seats to actually go along the policy-making process within European institutions. it's, in a way, legislated candidate quotas represent a middle way between voluntary quotas, which are really hard to be actually lead to a successful result, and reserved seats. So in a way, we believe that they could be better understood and have like a quicker way to be actually implemented in the legislative procedure that we highlighted. So that's what with regards to the second question. With the first one, then, I think that we have an example here by Damian, that it's not just a matter of holding seats in the most relevant positions for making a law a successful one, because as we mentioned, like the law reform, that is the electoral law reform that is currently passing through all the negotiations, is being promoted by Damian itself. So in a way, like, he's one of the youngest MEPs in the European Parliament, but is making process for young people, and in a way is actually advancing his political ideas, and his political success are being seen in the Parliament. So I would say that for sure it's an issue there, and having like leading and kind of reaching the position there to be the head of the committee is certainly important. But I mean, Europe is a democracy, and so it should not just matter the candidate, like the leader of the committee itself, but it should be a vote regarding the whole committee.
To briefly add on that, it's also the matter of if there are more young MEPs, we also, for our objective, double the representation of young people. So also there will be much bigger pressure to, for example, not elect the old white men, in leadership positions. So yes, it's also a matter of having more young people will lead to more pressure, also more pressure from the outside to elect leadership positions that are not only the old white men.
Thank you very much, Team 54. Any questions from the audience? All right, we have many questions. The lady in the back with a green sweater.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, your proposal. My question concerns the capacity and the capability of parties in the European Parliament to actually find enough young people within their party to join the list. And I was wondering what kind of mechanism you have envisioned so that you can also support parties in finding enough people that are young who are able to join them on the list and to fill those quota.
Thank you very much. Other questions? Here in with the yeah.
Thank you for your very interesting presentation. And obviously, I wanted to, let's say, address the problem of the young people and populist parties, because some of the populist parties in Europe, for instance, Lega, or even like leaders such as Zemmour, are really trying to connect with young people and their discontent to foster political proposals that might be detrimental to young people. So I wanted to ask you whether you, let's say, envisage this policy to, let's say, diffuse this time bomb of young people voting against their interests, and instead allow mainstream parties, to counter the, let's say, populist rhetoric about young people. So basically that, uses the distrust in institutions that young people have against them.
Okay, so regarding the first question, we don't think that there is a lack of young people that are willing to go into politics. Just by looking around here, seeing a full room, but also by seeing that in the last parliamentary election, it was the highest turnout for young people. So they are willing to engage in politics and to show their ideas and to be involved. It's just that maybe they need also an incentive, because they should, if also by introducing the youth candidate quotas, we might show that they will have a voice, and they're not just starting to trying to get into politics and eventually not get elected or not get voted at all. So this could also be, I think the young people are there, they want to make their voices heard, but it's also a matter of incentives. So by showing that the EU wants to listen to their voices also, I think many more young people also show up. And yes, and also, no.
No, I just wanted to add that, as we mentioned in the presentation, we believe that youth wings would play a very relevant role in this. Because for sure, like, we know that people and young people are becoming way more active in politics through manifestations, as you can see, Fridays for Future and all of that. But still, like, they also are engaging more with parties, political parties. In this, I think that, like, we think that the youth wings of political parties play a huge role, because empowering them and also being a setting and an area for exercise and for political participation, to build political expertise as well, it's something that is for sure one of the essential features of also our proposal. So on the second question regarding youth people, the populist parties, it's hard to say, because for sure it's an issue of populist parties, and they are gaining votes with regard to the young. But at the same time, it's also very likely that more European ones are also gaining votes from the young. So in a way, we believe that it would be rather a playing field. Like, our policy proposal could find consensus in both senses and in both the more right-leaning and left-leaning parties in a way. Because for sure, also when we mentioned all the post-materialist issues, for instance, and the being pro-LGBTQ rights and all of that, it's something that appeals more to the more left-leaning parties. But at the same time, as you mentioned, like, you proposed the opposite, like, you mentioned the opposite way. So you mentioned that more populist parties are also trying to get more votes from young people, and they are, even in some cases, successfully doing so. So in a way, like, we mentioned the way in which left-leaning parties and more progressive ones would be willing to implement such a measure, and you also mentioned the other way, so how more populist and anti-immigrant parties could also be willing to implement our proposal. In a way, it would be, I think, a balanced proposal that could be a bipartisan, probably, adoption.
Thanks a lot. I think we can take one more question from the audience, actually. Do we still have any questions? Tanguy, if you can, yeah. Gentleman in the beginning, yeah.
Thank you so much. My question relates to the initial constraints that you mentioned, financial and also perhaps the sort of environment that youth parties navigate right now. And I wonder if these quotas wouldn't have or lead to a backslash and then take up the space that parties such as Volt navigate right now, being that if you have quotas and people that take this space of voters, then they hijack the space that perhaps these type of parties that have independence then end up having now or in the present, and then they just are constrained by the party itself. In other words, the independence that not having quotas gives to parties like Volt is taken over by constrained youth representatives that just go into the parliament and represent the interests of the party and not the youth.
If I understood the question correctly, we do believe that, we hypothesize that we don't see youth quotas as a constraint, and we also don't think that the implementation of youth quotas is going to hijack the progress that has been made, for example, with
climate change related issues, because we have mentioned it so much during the presentation. We believe that it's actually a push towards faster policy shift in these priorities. We believe that more young people in the European parliaments, you know, these young people have distinct political inclinations. They are not delegating their interest to someone anymore. They themselves are representing and making their voices being heard. So I imagine this can only actually make the process of making these priorities enter into the policy-making agenda faster. I don't know if this answers your question.
If I could add something on this, I think your question is related also more broadly to quota regimes, if I'm not mistaken. In a way, you're saying that quota regimes restrict free access and free decisions of the electorate on who they decide to move and who they vote for. But as we have seen with gender quotas, for instance, these backlash of possible quota regimes have been proved to be less relevant than the benefits it could bring to the underrepresented group. Because we are saying that these are youth quotas because currently the youth are the ones that are underrepresented. But for us, it's also an age quota more in general. If they were the older ones that were underrepresented, the quotas would aim at tackling those kind of groups. So in a way, it would be something that is also hopefully temporary, and that would lead to greater benefits than it could lead to cons, I guess.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You may return to your seat. Thanks a lot. Now I think it's time to invite judges to go to the consultation room and to elect our winner of our second edition of the futurEU competition.
And at that point, it was our turn now to convince our partners. So the Hertie School and the Jacques Delors Centre. In other words, it was the pitching phase. And the first person we turned to was Professor Kirsten Reh, and she was everything that we could have asked for. She was ready to listen to our idea. She was ready to support it. She was enthusiastic, even more enthusiastic than us. And she gave all the motivation, the confidence that we needed to actually start working. And I would say that that was the moment where futurEU started.
But we have to say that the competition was not with us from the beginning, though. We have to give credit to Ricardo, who is here with us.
Shout out to Ricardo.
Shout out to Ricardo. Because Ricardo had the idea of the competition, and that's when everything started.
By now we are in spring 2019, right?
Yes, that's true. But at that time, there was only one of us who was in Berlin. The rest of us were on exchange or on professional year abroad. And so, but still, as you can see, we still met online every week to prepare for the competition. And yeah, so we were looking for funding, support, and thanks to our three key partners, the Jacques Delors Centre, the DAAD, and CIVICA, we actually managed to go quite quickly. So Jacques Delors Centre, they gave us direction in structuring the competition and finding the topic. The DAAD gave us funding, and CIVICA gave us the opportunity not to only be focused on the Hertie School, but also to expand our network to 7 other European universities of social sciences.
I said that we were in March 2019. All of that took months. So we got to March 2020, and as we all know, COVID happened, and we had to postpone our competition.
Yes, but if we go a bit further in the future, we're now in summer 2020, and we were still very convinced about organizing the competition amid the pandemic. So we built the website, we set the rules, we decided on the topic of the competition, and we launched our social media campaign.
Yes, and the other thing is that we started spreading the word. Again, it was the midst of the lockdown, and we had to convince students, so actually, first of all, to let students know about us, because no one knew about us, and then convince them to actually sign up for the competition, which was no easy task. It really wasn't.
You bet. And actually, we have to thank for the promotion Maryse, because without
Shout out to Maryse.
Yeah. I think Maryse, you're really the chief of promo.
Yes, also, it has to be said, we couldn't have done it only us 5. And that's when the first new member joined us, namely Victor. Now, shout out to Victor. And together, we managed to successfully launch the first edition of the futurEU competition. Still online, of course.
All right, now we have to tell the audience how we got even bigger.
Even bigger. Even bigger means that after the first competition, we were very proud of what we achieved. We were very proud, and we decided that we needed to go for a second round. However, it was really not all fun and games. It was also a huge amount of work, and we really needed to include more people. And that's when our other 5 new members reached out. So an applause now and a shout out to Lea, woo! Disha, Beatrice, Kira. Kira is there in the back. I don't know if you can see her. And Tanguy.
We also have to thank our incredible campus leaders. Campus leaders are students from CIVICA universities who help to spread the word about our competition. So this was crucial help. So I would like to give a round of applause for Mahmoud, Emma, Roxana, Clémence, and also Catherine and Laura, the other campus leaders who were following us online.
And here we are, 3 years later, we built an initiative. We reached thousands of students across different campuses in Europe, and we launched 2 competitions. Our Francesca even got recognized with the DAD prizes for the efforts of the futurEU. And here we are today.
Yes, we are live on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. Please follow us. We also have launched 2 podcasts, Ask futurEU and The Visionary. Actually, Chichi, could you tell us a bit more about the 2 podcasts?
Of course. So we have 2 podcasts, The Visionary. The Visionary is the one I mentioned before. The Visionary is a podcast that follows the topic of the competition. And while the competition asks students to come up with policy proposals, in the podcast we ask academics, policymakers, journalists, experts, you name it, with their own ideas, with their own visionary proposals, and then engage with us in a conversation. Some of the judges that were with us today and were with us the last year, and also Damian, they have sat with us. I highly suggest you go and have a listen. I might be a little biased. I am a host of many of those podcasts, so please go and have a listen. And then we have also another podcast, namely Ask futurEU. And Ask futurEU instead the format is slightly different. We still engage the same kind of people, but this time we ask them the burning questions of students about the European Union and their institutions. And it's really, it's entertaining, it's fun, and it's very interesting.
But most importantly, I think Chichi and I, we are both agreeing on this. We are very happy to be here with you today in presence, and especially to bring students from all over Europe to discuss the EU and to discuss how to shape the EU of tomorrow. Finally, in person.
This is also in line with the spirit of CIVICA, which verbatim reads out as to unite a variety of approaches and thrive on synergies to generate solutions to the world's most pressing challenges. To that, I would also like to add that at the end of the day, futurEU is the result of the committed effort of a group of friends that decided to stick together for years just to achieve a vision.
Exactly. And last but not least, we want to pay tribute to a person who inspired us all at futurEU. He's a person who was our professor and our president, Henrik Endelein, to whose vision we owe futurEU's existence. Thank you very much. We still have have 5 more minutes for the judges to elect our winner. So I suggest a small break. If you
other water,
have another sip of water or chat with your neighbor. So, before announcing the winners, we would like to give a round of applause to all of you. Regardless of the outcome, you have great ideas and you made it until here. Congratulations. So we would like to give you certificates to all semi-finals team, and for that I will invite Francesca and Disha to come with me to the stage. And as soon as you are ready, I will call our first team, Team 73. Can we get Team 73? Almost Team 73. Congratulations.
Quick shout out to Rosa, who I was not a single person team, of course, who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, but she was very, very happy to work on this and to get to know all of you.
Team 94, can we have Team 94 on the floor? Congratulations.
Maybe the mask is on it.
Can we have Team 36? Team 36? Team 33. Team 92. 92. And last but not least, we have Team 49. 49. Congratulations.
Okay. Okay, finally, we are at the moment where that is this working? Yes. We're waiting for, and I would ask to please join me on stage, the two finalist teams, the one that exactly, and also come, join on stage. And also the chairman of the second competition, the judge, exactly, to announce the winner of the competition.
Thank you so much. I was asked to give a little speech. I will try to keep it short because I know we're all very excited to hear who won today's competition. It is a very great pleasure to be here, and especially to be here for a second time, because of course this is the second edition of futurEU, and it is very great to see so many of you from different countries and different universities coming together in Berlin at the Hertie School to work and to discuss on EU policies. Because this is of course also what the EU is about, right? To come together, working together across member states, across languages, across cultures, to build a better future. And I think initiatives like futurEU really embody this spirit and this idea. And this year you were asked to propose bold and visionary policies to address EU action oriented to next generations, and arguing why it would make the EU more responsive and more appealing to your needs, to their needs, to your needs. And I think the topic could not be more timely or more important. I think we also saw two main themes today, or two main themes in the different proposals that we've read and that we've heard, and those are youth unemployment and youth representation in EU policy. And I think this shows again the importance of ensuring that EU institutions are not dominated by old white men, as Sebastian said several times today. But that we must ensure that EU policies address the needs and wishes of the future generations and ensure that also their outlook on the future is a positive one. And all of the proposals that we've seen, I think, were very bold. And I think that is good. I think boldness is perhaps what we need if we want to ensure change moving forward, also on the EU level. So even though there can only be one winner tonight, I think Damian already said it, we think you are all winners. It was very great proposals, very great presentations, and I really hope that you will keep doing what you are doing and what you did today, because I think if you do, then the future of the EU will be in very good hands. So thank you for that. And before I actually announce the winner of this year's competition, let me also congratulate Francesca and the futurEU team on your very excellent work. I think it's really, really, really fantastic how you managed to bring together so many different people from different countries and how you really perfectly organized this entire event. And I think I speak for all the judges from the Jacques Delors Centre that we are very much in awe of your dedication, enthusiasm, but also professionalism in putting this together. And I would actually like to ask the futurEU team on the stage for a second, if that's possible. Because Heidi... Oh, now it's very crowded, sorry. Oh, there are so many. So I think a round of applause is in order. Thank you. Well, thank you. Yes, and sorry for this confusion of moving up and down the stage. But no, really, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate all the work that you've put into, and we're very much impressed by how well you did it and how well everything is organized. And thank you. Yeah, so obviously this surprise was not organized by the futurEU team, otherwise it would have been much smoother than this. But now on to why I'm actually up here, and that is to announce this year's winning team. And I have to say it was a very, very difficult decision. So we had very intense discussions actually in the judges' room. We had some disagreements perhaps, but in the end, we decided to choose the proposal that gives the next generation and the youth a seat at the table and perhaps also paves the way for more structural changes going into the future. So the winning team is Team 54 on the quota. Congratulations. Medals.
This is, sorry, no, finalist team. It's silver.
And now on to the gold medals. Wait.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all.
Congratulations. Congratulations. If you want to say a few words, you can. Otherwise, you can, your choice. Okay, fine. You can also just leave the floor, the stage if you want.
I mean, let's vote during the next elections, I guess.
Nice. Well, that was chaotic, but nice, very nice. Well, all was said and done. I hope you liked it. And we came to the end of this. We officially declare the second edition of the futurEU competition 2022. The end. The end. Now, thank you so much. We thanked everyone in this room and not in this room. And thank as well to the audience who is sitting with us today. And thanks as well to the audience who's sitting at home. Bye to you. Bye, Mom. Bye, Dad. Bye, everyone. And if you want to join us for just a reception just outside the room, you're welcome to.
Thank you very much.